Paper 2, Wills and Estate, the easiest paper of the 4 if you ask me. This is a paper that I didn't even take long to study for. I wrote it once and I did so well. In this video, I want to share with you tips and tricks as to how to go about preparing for paper 2, as well as things to do in the exam that will maximize you getting the highest marks possible. Hey, what's good? Welcome to my channel. My name is Shella, or you can call me your lawyer bestie, and I am an admitted attorney of the High Court of South Africa. Now in this video, I want to share with you some tips and tricks as to how to go about preparing for paper 2, that is Wills and Estate. If you find this video to be helpful, please give it a big thumbs up. Drop down to the comment section and let me know what you think. Share this video with somebody who you think will find it helpful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into it. The first thing I have to say about paper 2 is that it's not difficult. It's actually one of the easier papers, but don't underestimate it, because if you get the L&D wrong, chances are you are not going to pass the paper, because the L&D account counts for the majority of the paper, and then the theory part of things is the lesser mark. But don't neglect the theory thinking, if I just know the L&D account, I will be okay. Personally, that was my strategy. I said, I'm going to perfect the L&D account. I'm going to know everything, the estate duty, addendum. Like, I'm going to know everything pertaining to the L&D account, and then I'll just browse through the theory. The Lord helped me in that. I remember the theory as well. That's why I did so well. So I wouldn't recommend you going off of that strategy that L&D or nothing. No, don't just know the L&D. Also give yourself time to knowing the other parts of the work, so that you supplement the marks that you get on the L&D with the marks that you will get for theory. And also, when you do that, you lessen the pressure of wanting to get 100% on the L&D, because when you know that you have studied other parts of the work, you know that I don't have to get 100 for the L&D. Yes, I must maximize on the number of marks that I can get for the L&D, but I still have the theory to fall back on. So the two will work together in order to give you a great mark. So when it comes to answering the questions in the exam, allocate enough time for you. A lot of people have complained about not having enough time for this paper. 2 hours is not enough. So if you don't allocate your time well, you find that you will spend so much time on the L&D, for example, and you won't even get to answering the theory questions because you have spent like 2 hours on the L&D. So I would recommend spending about 15 to 20 minutes on the theory questions. And the smart thing to do would be, when you get your question paper in the exam, you have reading time. During your reading time, just jot down answers for your theory-based questions, so that when you get to them, you are not like starting from scratch. You already have like the answers jotted down, and then you just transfer them to your answer booklet. And then you can use the rest of the time for the L&D account. Some people will recommend starting with the L&D account. I started with the L&D account, but that is only because I had jotted down the answers on my question paper, and then I started with the L&D account, then ended with my theory. So either way you decide to do it, I highly recommend you jotting down answers from the time you get your question paper during the reading time. And when it comes to the issue of time, knowing your theory will really minimize the number of minutes you spend per question. When you know what you're doing, especially with the L&D, it will not take you 1 hour, 30 minutes. It really wouldn't. It would not take you that long if you know the work. When you know the work, I think the L&D will take you about less than an hour, maybe 45 to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So emphasis is on knowing the work. Know the work, because that is what will enable you to do things quicker when you know what you're doing. Because not knowing what you're doing will delay you for sure. That's a fact. And there are 4 acts that you need to know, and that is the Wills Act, the Intestate Succession Act, the Administration of Estates Act, as well as the Estate Duty Act. While you're studying your theory, make sure that where provisions of the Act are stated, make sure that you read those provisions in full in the Act, So have the act open when you are studying so that you have easy access to it and you know what the act says and specific provisions that you need to know for the exam. And this is so important. Like, for example, with the Wills Act, if you don't know what the act says regarding the requirements of a valid will, that's going to work to a deficit, because you might find a question where they would ask you to list the requirements of a valid will, or they will give you a will and then you'll have to spot which provisions are in line with the act and which ones are not. And you will not know that if you don't know the specific provisions in the act. So when it comes to wills, make sure that you know the validity of wills. Know what happens in the cases of estate massing in terms of drafting a will. Where there's estate massing, what are the provisions that you need to put in the specific will? Know also the requirements of a valid will. So as you can see already, when it comes to just wills only, there isn't so much to know. It's just basic things, but don't neglect them. You find that for wills, the question that you are asked counts for about 10 or 15 marks, and that's really a lot of marks to lose for you not knowing these things. So don't neglect them. Know them. They are not difficult. And then no issues relating to intestate succession as well. What happens when a person dies without a will? What happens to their estate? What happens if they've got children or they've got multiple spouses? They like this one in the exam, where a person dies and they've got multiple spouses, or a person is married and just before they died, they had a girlfriend and the girlfriend is pregnant and the child is not born yet. So you have to know the nasciturus fiction and how it applies in such instances. What happens where there's adopted children, stepchildren? So you have to know how the estate will be devolved in different situations, because different situations require different provisions or require for the estate to be divided in a certain way. So you have to know the provisions of the act and how to apply them practically. So don't neglect this part. I've seen so many people fail this paper because they had focused on the L&D account alone, and then when they got to the paper, they didn't get the L&D quite correctly, and then they also missed out on the marks that they could have gotten if they had focused on the theory as well. So you don't want to make a mistake. That's a huge mistake that you shouldn't be making in this exam. You also need to know the administration of estates. It's not usually asked, but just know it, because sometimes they do throw it in there. It's not a common question, but sometimes they do throw it in there. Things like advertising in the newspaper, bank accounts and stuff. So just know the administration of estates. And then the L&D account. You have to know how to draft the L&D account. I want to talk you through the L&D account by telling you where marks are allocated. Now for the L&D account, my biggest tip for L&D accounts, are you ready for it? It is listing things correctly. Now I know this sounds so basic. It sounds like what do you mean listing things correctly? Of course I'm gonna list things correctly. Well, that's where marks are, and a lot of people just write whatever they feel. They don't list the assets and various things properly, and they lose marks. For example, the heading alone is 5 marks. So that's you writing first and final liquidation and distribution account in the master estate of blah 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 with ID number. Already that's 2 marks. And surviving spouse of whoever with that person's ID number, whom the deceased was married in community of property, that's another mark. Then you write the date of death, another mark. And then you write the master's reference. You create your own little reference, unless if they give you a reference, then you write that reference. That's another marks. That's 5 marks already. Even if you don't know anything in the L&D account stuff, you already have 5 marks for writing this correctly. Now we move on to the listing of the assets. I always say that when it comes to the L&D account, by listing things correctly, you can be on about 15 marks. Now, this is for somebody who doesn't know anything about the L&D account. Just knowing the relevant headings and listing the assets properly without having to think about a lot, you already have about 10 to 15 marks. So maximize on this. Then you will write liquidation account, assets. You will have your first heading, for example, as immovable property. Write the assets in full as stated in the question paper. Don't just write a house, you will not get a mark. Yes, we know that a house is immovable property, but you have to write the full description. So you'll write for whatever, the place where the house is located, as well as, the province, the acres. They will usually give you this information. Write it all out. And then you'll write held under deed of transfer, number what. And then you write add valuation. So that's already the description, that's 1 mark. And then you write add valuation, maybe it's 3.5 million. Then you write 3.5 million, that's 2 marks. For that only. That's already 2 marks. Plus the 5 of the heading, you're already on 7 just by listing this thing correctly. Then under immovable property, you will list all the immovable property. So if you're a little confused, remember this. Immovable property refers to property that cannot be physically moved. For example, a house, a plot, land, a piece of land, an earth. Those are immovable property. So when it comes to what is considered immovable property, remember that, so that you keep it in the back of your mind as you read in the question, that is this thing a movable or an immovable asset. So already by just knowing the difference between immovable and movable assets, you will get marks. And then movable assets will refer to assets that are movable, like the name suggests. So a car and things like furniture, things like jewelry, art collection, those are movable properties. And then you move on to movable property and you will list all the movable property. So you will write maybe, for example, 2012 Toyota Corolla, that's the car there. Then you'll write the registration or the number plate. That's a mark already for describing it. And then you'll get another mark for writing add valuation. So that is the value of the car. Then you will write there maybe 100,000 rand. Then you list all the other movable properties. By just that part of the L&D account, you can bag about 10 to 15 marks alone on that part, because that includes the heading as well. So you can bag about 10 to 15 marks before you even get into the real stuff that requires you to think. So then you come to assets reduced to cash. Like you did for the other part, you have to write these in full and describe them in full. You see that it's important to know the theory as well, because the theory will enable you to know which assets fall under which headings. It's not enough to describe the things in full. If they're under the wrong headings, they will be marked as incorrectly. So that's why you need to know the theory behind the L&D account. So on the assets reduced to cash part, that's where you will put your shares. That's where you will put money that the deceased had in their bank account. Then you also write, the various bank accounts. Sometimes they'll give you like a whole lot of bank accounts. So just write all of that down because you'll get marks for it. Policies you also put here. And then after that, just do a total of the assets. And then after that, you move on to liabilities. So you will put all the liabilities in there. And then after putting in the liabilities, you will have to do a recapitulation statement. So that is where you will write, this is the total for the assets, and then this is the total for the liabilities. Then assets minus liabilities. Then you have a final amount. If it is in the deficits, you have to state, for example, that the deficiency will be made good by the heirs in equal shares. So you'll have to state who will make good for the deficit. Then you come to the distribution account, and then after that, it might be estate duty addendum. If they don't tell you expressly to exclude it, you need to include it. I think the only time you need to leave out the estate duty addendum is if they expressly say, leave out the estate duty addendum. It does happen sometimes, but rarely. Just read the question and then you will know if you need to include it or you need to exclude it. And then at the end of it, the executor certificate, make sure that you put the executor certificate. Even if you messed this question up, even if you missed the distribution account and estate duty addendum part, if you know that you didn't do well, please don't forget to put the executor's certificate at the end. Even if on your L&D account, you have your heading, right? That's already 5 marks. You have the assets and liabilities. And then you get confused there by distribution account and estate duty addendum. Even if those parts you skip, please don't neglect to put the executor certificate. I know when people get dribbled on distribution account and estate duty addendum, they're just like, oh, you know what, stuff this question, I'm moving on. But don't move on without the executor certificate, because you also get marks for it. So the executor certificate will read something as follows: I, the undersigned Shall declare to the best of my knowledge and belief that the account is true and proper account of the liquidation and distribution of the estate, that's a mark, and all assets, that's a mark, and income collected subsequent to the death of the deceased, that's a mark, to the date of the account have been disclosed herein, that's another mark. And then you put the date, and then you put the signature of the executor, that's another mark. So even if you mess up other parts, at least get these 6 marks, at least. So what I'm trying to tell you is that with the L&D, even in the midst of confusion, fight for your marks. Fight for those 6 that comes from executor certificate. Fight for the heading. At least fight to get somewhere. If anything, you might just get 50 on the dot, but I don't want you to get 50 on the dot. You are going to do exceedingly great. You're about to get 80%, okay? By studying well, by preparing adequately. I would also just say that for this paper, when you're studying for this paper, when dividing your time, I would say put much emphasis on the L&D account. The reason I say this is because the theory behind the L&D account is quite a lot, and you need to practice the L&D a number of times in order for you to get it right. So don't just know the theory, practice it by going over past papers. If anything, when you do past papers for paper 2, do the L&D. You don't really need to practice the requirements of a will. It's either you know the requirements of a valid will or you don't, as opposed to the L&D that requires much practice as opposed to the other parts of the work. So those are my tips for this exam. This exam is not difficult. I repeat, this exam is not a difficult exam. Just prepare adequately and put much emphasis on what needs to be emphasized on, and allocate your time well, even in the exam. And that is it. Those are my tips for passing paper 2. I hope that you have found them to be insightful, and I wish you the best when it comes to writing this paper. May you do exceedingly well. Until then, I will see you on my next video. I'm sending you tons of love and light. Bye.